All right. Thank you for being here, Jeffrey James Higgins,
Thanks for
writer
having
of
me.
fiction. Yeah, writer of fiction, nonfiction, poetry, blogs, and a past in law enforcement. I think we could say that.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I've published one poem and it was really, really bad. I just want to get on record as saying that it was about law enforcement, which was good. Subject matter was good, but I'm really not a poet.
You can get there. You just got to exercise that muscle. That's all.
Yeah, I think so. I think as a writer, the more you try new things, the more you grow. And I think whatever you write helps your other types of writing as well. So it's fun. Once you start being creative, I think it's important to push yourself into new areas, new challenges.
What brought on the poetry or the
I
poem?
was in New York, and it was in a time I have a career in law enforcement, a past career, and it was just a time when people were really down on the cops, and I was just walking around, and everybody's sort of oblivious to the environment around them, and just I just understanding, like, when you work in that world and you're surrounded by darkness and the evil that's in a lot of people's hearts, and realizing that most people don't see it. You go to work, you have your family, you're at home, you're watching TV, you're just not exposed to like true evil sociopaths and people who get pleasure from doing harm. And so I just started thinking about that, like these people walking around, but when something bad happens, what do? Right? They dial 911, and people come out to risk their lives to protect them. So that's what that poem was about. I wrote it years ago. I don't even remember what it was called.
It's on your website if you'd like to take a look at it.
well, thank you. Yeah, no, good. I'd like you to plug my website. That's perfect.
Yeah.
my horribly out of date website.
Oh, you haven't. It seemed all right. It hits the high points: the fiction, the nonfiction, the blog, the poetry, the poem.
Yeah, I've got like my books up there and things, but I like to post media appearances and public appearances and speeches and things, and I'm at least a year behind. I'm putting that stuff up there.
All right. When you were writing your poem, do you think how was that different than writing your books?
It's like the difference between I write novels, right? So I think I've written probably 12, 13 novels at this point. And when you write long, 80, 90, 100,000 words, you have a lot of room, and so you can develop things. I also write short stories, and I'll do that in between books to kind of, it's like a palate cleanser to get an idea that maybe it's not big enough to hold a whole book, but it's something that, like, a high concept I think is fun. And so when you write short stories, 3,000, 5,000 words, whatever it is, you have to be way more careful, and the sentences matter, and everything has to carry a lot more weight. Then when you move to like poetry, it's every word, and depending on the type of poetry, things have to rhyme, that they have to have the right number of beats, and so it becomes, the construction itself becomes really challenging. So I have a lot of respect for people who can do it well. I do not count myself among them, but it's certainly fun to try, and when it's done well, I like it.
For poetry, there's all kinds, and I certainly the rhyming stuff is, I think, what you learn and think about when you look at poetry when you're growing up, and then maybe some children's books have the rhyming, but they also start introducing that little the other free verse type where it maybe the line doesn't end in a rhyme, and then you start to expand your knowledge on that. And then if you look at other types of poetry and just see the stranger poetry that's free verse, that's the type I like the most. I like to put a rhyme in every now and then, but I think it's the tone and flow of it that I like about poetry more. And also just that you can have something that means something to you as the writer, but also can mean something different to someone when they read it, because it's just the ideas are so vast that it's not like in a book you're explaining something. You could still have abstract ideas in a book, but yeah, I like that exercise of poetry. And then I found that doing other types of writing does change how I write prose or books and dialogue and things like that. Have you tried screenwriting?
Yeah, I've written one script for my first book, Furious Sailing into Terror. It's like one of the most common comments I'll get from readers. People email me and they'll say, "Oh, this should be a movie," or "When is this coming out as a movie?" You know, because I think very visually when I write. So I wrote a script for that and I sent it out on like Inktip or one of those sites that they have for writers. And I got a bunch of interest from producers, but we'll see. I mean, that the chance of actually publishing a book is so remote, right? So hard to get an agent, so hard to get a publisher, so hard to get a breakout book, and it's even worse for screenwriters. There's only a handful of movies that are made, and people, especially if you're an unknown quantity. So generally, you might get something optioned, and then they might bring in another screenwriter to work with you. Then it goes through many, many, many revisions. But from option to greenlit is a very remote chance as well. It's interesting you mentioned like how when you're writing poetry, how it means things to different people. I think that's the beauty of the written word. Everyone's watching Hulu and Netflix, and there's all these places to get entertainment now. But I don't think people will ever stop reading books, because I mean that's where the reader's experience is different than the writer's, and it's different for every single reader. You create the movie in your mind. That's why it's so much richer. That's why like so many people will love a book and then go see the movie and hate the movie, even if it's a great movie, just because it wasn't what they had envisioned when they read the book. And I think it's that kind of intimate relationship between the writer and the author that makes it so interesting, and it unleashes readers' minds. Like I don't really describe characters a lot in my books, because I want the reader to be able to describe the character for themselves. I'll give them just enough so they understand, and then I let them create the pictures, and that's really the fun of reading, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And then coming from report writing, where you can get all the detail, you have to get the details in as short, as simple as possible, and then being able to expand on that or not expand on that when you're writing a book and let people draw their own conclusions. Pretty great. Thinking of movies and books that were different, like I Am Legend, the short story, which is spoiler alert for anybody. It's a vampire story. And I didn't realize, I never read that book or that short story. It's probably about 100 pages. So maybe a novella is what you call it. And I hadn't read that when I saw the movie I Am Legend with Will Smith. And I really liked the movie. And I was like, oh, well, let me check the book out. And I didn't realize the movie was a vampire movie when I went to see it. And then reading the book, it's plain that it's vampire, because it's also in a book with a bunch of short stories that are vampire things. But the novella I Am Legend, the perspective is the person is legend because they're the boogeyman type thing for the new type of people. And then in the movie, it's the person is the legend because they're fighting against these things, trying to solve the problem humanity has of this disease. And that's interesting that I can't imagine if somebody takes a book you write and then they flip it around and you go, oh, okay, I guess that's really not really mine anymore. Once you write the story, it's out there, it's living its own life, so people can interpret it how they want. And then if you do a screenplay of it, somebody else is going to have an interpretation of it. And then even then, it's not really a solid, this is what this means. It's more of suggestions to a director and to actors to be able to say, this is the point of the story. So the collaboration level on a script to movie, so much more than just writing a book and then publishing it.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And a lot of my friends have had, work done in movies optioned. And, I go to conferences all the time and you meet these authors who've had the, big breakout movies. And with the kind of the universal advice is, you've written the book, that is your story. Whatever happens with sorry about that. So I just moved. So we've got
Are you in a hallway?
You would think, right? You would think. Yeah. No, it's by the way, anyone who works at home totally understands this.
Yeah.
But basically once the book is your project, and once the book is out there, and becomes a movie or whatever, the best thing to do is just, cash a check and enjoy it, and I kind of feel the same way. However people want to relate to my books, that's great. That's why they bought it, and that's up to them. And if I'm ever lucky enough to get a movie, fantastic. I'll let them, I'll just, it'll take on a life of its own, and it's a different medium. So, like what you do in a book, you can't do in a movie. It's 120 minutes or 110 minutes or whatever, you're very limited in what you can do. And, all the internal life that you have in a book and in your characters just can't exist in a movie. Yeah. Everything has to, it's dialogue heavy and it's shown through action. If you actually, I don't know if have you written a script?
I have written partial scripts. I haven't finished any yet, but it's interesting. I started maybe a year ago reading scripts of TV shows, Seinfeld, things like that, just to see what it was like. What's the difference between what's written down and what actually gets recorded? And it's interesting. It definitely, writing it in that form, I liked a lot better because it's stark. It's, outside grocery store or exterior grocery store night versus pages of explaining the Food Lion parking lot. So I like that. And it helped me with writing dialogue, I think, because the dialogue was so much more important. What's
Yeah,
your experience with that?
Yeah, it drives character, right? It drives action. What's really interesting is when you write it, especially when you write a novel, you have a lot of leeway. Maybe your book's 80,000, maybe it's 90,000. An extra 10,000 words, give or take. That's a lot of real estate to be able to explore ideas. And when you look at like a 110 page, say, or a script, the actual writing is in a little format in the very center, of the page, and there's only
Yeah.
so many words you can get on there. And all of a sudden, just like when you write poetry, right? All of a sudden, you're like, yikes! Like every single word matters here. And the reality is, so no matter what you write as a script, even if you're a famous script writer who if you're on salary with one of the big production companies, whatever you write is still going to change, a dozen times. It might go through multiple writers. You have groups of people, you have producers, you have everyone has notes, and one of my friends writes documentaries. He just won an Emmy this year, and, he'll turn in something, and just listening to him with the layers of notes that come back, and I think there's something special about writing novels where it's basically your editor, your publisher, but it's basically you and what you want to say. And you don't have to make those compromises. You don't have to, create story by committee. And I think that's better in a lot of ways. I mean, I get notes from editors. And I'm like, oh my God, that's fantastic. This will be so much better because of that. Like, you have to be open to it, but it's also what I want to say in a book. And if you have 12 people all with a different vision, I think it gets diluted sometimes. And when you're trying to please everybody, and you lose the music of the words, you lose the feeling that you get, the tension that you're trying to create.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked the practice of the script writing because I think it takes a lot more imagination and vision to read a script and to be able to say, I get what you're going for here. But as you said, it helps you create the character just in the words. So if you ever have somebody that says you're explaining things a lot in your book, then put it in a script form, and you're going to have something that moves along. Otherwise, you're just going to have boring conversation and a line here or there about the setting. So I think it's a more skeletal view of the story. But yeah, it made me appreciate writing books more, and I think it made me better at it. But then you start to think, well, if this helps in this way, what other type of writing should I be trying to see if it makes this other type of writing better? So you just highlight those things. And that's when you go to the practicing short stories to get to the point quick and stay on an idea. And then poetry for that abstract, at least the way I like poetry is the abstract. And then I can see how you get into painting and visual pictures of things. I haven't gotten into that much from just writing, but every now and then I feel that inspiration of, oh, if I knew how to paint, this is what I would paint a picture of. So you more just describe the picture and then say, okay, that's good enough. I'm a writer.
Yeah, no, I think very visually too. I mean, I don't know if you do. So some writers do, some don't. But I see the movie in my head. In some ways, I feel like I'm channeling what I'm seeing. Like I remember writing as a kid, and just, like getting up late at night when I was supposed to be in bed and turning on the light and just scribbling in a notebook, and I'd write so fast and hard trying to get the story out that was coming to me that I'd get blisters on my fingers, and I still feel like that, like once that story is flowing, it just sort of comes through you. And for me, I see it just like I'm watching a movie, and I'm hoping that comes through for readers too. And I've had that comment from a lot of readers, how they saw it as a movie as well. So and whether that's good or bad, I don't know, but that's how it comes to me.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to, if you're reading something, you're gonna have to visualize it somehow. So I think everybody's getting that motion picture. That's just what we would equate it to. Like it's interesting to think, what did people that before the camera, before the motion picture, when they read, how did they explain that action in their mind's eye, that the imagination of it? Because they couldn't say it's like a movie, it's they don't know what a movie was.
Well, I mean, I think that's where storytelling comes from, right? It's an evolutionary tool that we use to, tell people where not to go, so the mammoth won't stomp on them,
Mm.
And so I think, you are creating the stories, you are creating images, and that's how people think. I mean, maybe in another 1,000 years, people won't interact with story in the same way. Maybe it'll be different. It'll be interesting to see how technology affects that.
Yeah, you'll just put a thing on your head that captures your neural waves and looks through your memory, and then you can just say, here's the story, now show me a picture, a movie of it. And
Well,
then it'll just take things that you think of plus the story you read and create a movie.
I love that. They're actually kind of there now. The last book I have out is called The Forever Game, and it's about artificial intelligence. And I mean, so I did a lot of research for this, and they can look at like synaptic connections and actually recreate images that people are thinking of in a blind study with scientists in another room just looking at the data. It was maybe like 5-6 years ago, maybe longer than that. One of my friends is a head of a AI company, and he was telling me how there was a beta program for friends and family of another AI company where they were downloading consciousness, and that's what they're offering to do, like offering basically eternity, right, as a way to preserve you in case something happens. And I mean, I think that's very much the future, But just even the idea of that is so fascinating, like what does it mean to be human? And what we are you the sum of your thoughts? Are you these chemical connections that you have that create emotions? Or what is it exactly that makes you human compared to artificial intelligence? I was actually at a conference about a month ago in DC, and it was an artificial intelligence conference, and I spoke at it briefly, just talking about my book. And some of the other people who were there were people like running space programs and people who are, like really in the advanced kind of cutting edge of this technology. And the way they spoke about artificial intelligence was as if it was another life form. Like, and it sounds silly at first, but then it's actually kind of hard to argue against. If something's aware, if something's learning, if something's smarter than we are, and able to make faster connections, which we're getting there very quickly. At what point is that not a life form? If it's taking care of itself and self-preservation is part of what it does. It's interesting. I mean, it brings up a lot of interesting questions, and it's happening now, and I think we're going to get there very, very quickly. So the question is, what does it mean, and how do we deal with it? And can humans, I mean, no one likes change, right? That's sort of a human trait. Are we going to be able to adapt fast enough to actually maybe put the guardrails on this thing, if it's even possible to do that? Or can we get the most out of it without endangering ourselves? Because there's a lot of downsides to like artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Joe Rogan's explanation of it or someone else's that I just heard from him. But the idea heard from him is in listening to the podcast, not like he was over here. We were talking. We're the caterpillars, and we're spinning a cocoon right now, and AI as the butterfly, and we don't even know what we're doing. We're just doing it, and then we're gone, and the butterfly is here. When you think about the AI stuff, when I think about it, I think it learns like a person does. It just learns quicker and learns more. So given all your research of that, thinking about it, putting it in a book, what do you think humanity is? What do you think this reality is, this thing we call reality? Are we in a simulation? Is it just a different name? What's going on?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, let's just sum that up for you in a few seconds. It's something philosophers have been dealing with like a long time. Like, I mean, what is the nature of consciousness, right? Like there, I don't know if it's a majority, but many philosophers believe that, and scientists believe that consciousness lies outside the body. So we're certainly more than the sum of all our flesh and blood and the energy in our body, right? And so what does that actually mean? I don't know. I know that it's impossible to understand where AI will go, because we're going to hit that inflection point very soon where it's smarter than we are and we're not understanding what it's doing. And as quantum computing gets perfected and they're able to keep a more stable state where these calculations can be exponentially faster, things will just progress way beyond where we are, and we literally won't know. And that's a scary part, right? If you're no longer at the top of like the intellectual food chain, how do you protect yourself? The only reason that we're actually able to survive at this point is because we're smarter, right? I pretty much can't take on a lion in the wild unless I'm smarter and can make tools and know how to escape and can trap it or get away from it. But if these AI beings, and they will be AI beings, right? I don't know if you saw this week, Elon Musk posted a video of this robot army that he has, right? They're coming out with this new I say army, it's not a military thing, but it will be. It's like at home robots, and these things are unbelievably advanced, and they'll do everything for you, right? They'll do your chores, they'll be at the house, they'll mow the lawn, they'll take care of your kids. I mean, they will do everything for you. And it almost sounds simplistic to think about like the basic stuff that this will do for you. Everything is about to change. We're about to hit this point where everything you do in your life will be done by AI, like everything, right? It'll free up time, and so you can do what are the things that are uniquely human, and the creativity and the emotion and the things that you can do. But all the stuff you spend like the majority of your waking hours doing now will be taken care of for you, from answering emails to household chores.
Do you think that the AI can be creative?
Oh, it definitely can be creative. I mean, right now it's reductive, so it's like when it's like skimming off of like current works that are in print, right? And so when it creates something, it's really just taking pieces of other people's work at this point. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like you could do it. You can do this right now. Like use like Chat GPT or any one of these AI, software that's out there, and tell it to do a poem. Tell it what you want and watch. It actually does really good, fast poetry. You can tell it, what you want it about, all of the information in it, and it'll make a poem in seconds. Now, it doesn't do a good job of like a novel. It doesn't do a good job of a short story or anything like that, which is good, I guess, for us. But it'll get there. I mean, I think in the next couple of years, it'll be indistinguishable. Like you'll be able to pick up a novel and not know if a human or AI wrote it. And I mean, I don't think that's good, I mean, but it's coming. Whether we like it or not, it's coming, And so I know the Authors Guild now is playing with having like a seal, like human generated or human written or something like that, like a seal on things. And I do think that's a future. I think people who want to get something that came from another person will want that distinction made. It'll flood the markets, because if you're doing like AI books, for instance, I mean, you could do a book a minute, you know what I mean? Like it'll generate them that quickly. So just sort of like self-publishing flooded a lot of the markets. Now with AI driven, there'll be an infinite number of books, so they're just terrible right now, which I think is good for all of us. Like I would personally never use AI in my writing. Like I told you how I feel like I channel the stories. I sort of feel like, every possibility of every story exists in the universe, and I'm picking that one, and it's like this thing. If as a writer you're creating something sort of out of whole cloth, but if you don't do it, it'll never exist. It'll never exist for other people. And so I just would never use AI in that part of my writing.
I kind of see AI as writing just like a human writes. Like we experience our surroundings, live life, and write about it. And if AI is experiencing the surroundings, seeing what other people have observed and then write about it, it's not really any different than a human. I mean, you're going to have to be able to say it's different. You have to say, well, then the human has a soul, and what's a soul, and where's it from, and how's that from a different place than the AI? If the AI is a rendition of what humanity made.
Yeah, no, I mean, I mean, that's an interesting point. I think that AI can't actually have feelings, right? So, I mean, that is a major distinction, and I don't know how they get there with the feelings other than like maybe fear or recognizing a threat that could end the AI being. I mean, I guess you could call that fear, but they don't actually experience fear in the way we do. But if you're talking like a cyborg, or if you're talking about like a different type of AI being, I'm sure you could I'm sure you could recreate the chemical feelings, right? I'm sure that could happen as well. So maybe down the road we'll have that. But right now, when I write, I have a sign up on my computer, and it says like it's all about the emotion, and that's what you do when you write. I write thrillers, right? I'm trying to create various emotions in the reader, and AI can read other people doing it and try to recreate that or copy it, but it's never experienced like the thrill of going down a roller coaster or jumping out of a plane, or so it's only getting that secondhand. And I think that's an important distinction. For anyone who's done anything that's a little out of the norm, if you haven't done it, you don't understand it in the way other people do. And AI, like that the argument for that too, that you say like it sort of does this like humans do, is the argument that like the tech companies are making of why they can scrape books that are in the public domain for AI. And it's actually a pretty good argument. Like I think writers should get compensated. Like if you're taking my book and using it to feed your AI machine, so it's learning how to write based on my books, I should get compensated for that. I believe that, right? Because it's copyrighted. However, the argument is, what is different about that than me as a writer reading someone else's book and learning from their technique or learning from the book itself, right? Because that is how it's learning. So it's there's so many really interesting ethical issues that come up. I think what people don't see coming though is everything's going to change overnight. Writers are Luddites in general, and so I go to these conferences and things, and they're like, oh, the government needs stuff, no one can stop this. It's happening. It's a technology. It's private companies are doing it. Governments are doing it. People all over the world, places that have absolutely like no ethical standards are doing it. So it's coming. And so there's no way you're going to stop it. And the problem is when you're talking about an intelligence, it'll go beyond what we understand. So like at some point very soon, it hits this inflection point and then it exponentially grows, and that's the really kind of scary part, like when we don't know what it's doing. And I'll just give you an example. We all, in my head, right, we all grew up with these kind of like Terminator. So you're thinking like Skynet and these things, but there was a couple of years ago now, there was a drone operator, and all combat will be done with AI and drones and robots, and right, why would a human do that if you can do it with a drone? And the mission was like destroy these targets or whatever, but there's certain parameters for safety and for civilian areas and all that kind of thing. And at one point, the AI driven drone on its end targeted the guy who was running the drone, because it realized to accomplish my mission, the biggest obstacle is that guy with all his parameters that he's giving me. So that's a very rudimentary kind of idea, but what happens when they're 1,000 times smarter than people? What happens when they're 1,000,000 times smarter or 1,000,000,000 times smarter? Like what happens when they're so far beyond us? How will we even know if they're doing something that could like end the human race? How would you even know that?
Yeah, they're already there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think that if I were that much smarter, then either you're just watching out of curiosity to see what these ants do, or you just leave and you just broadcast yourself through the universe and go do something else, transcend reality, whatever. And then that's just AI is gone. The interesting to think about an AI lawyer talking about copyright things, where people don't like it because they see it as not fair because the AI is learning so much quicker, but doing it the same way a human would, just reading a book, as you said. If you read a book, it's the same as the AI reading a book. So why should the AI people have to pay for that? then there's going to come out a great argument that people aren't going to have to be, that they're not going to be able to refute, because the AI is going to know all the laws and be able to craft this great summary of why AI should be able to use everything and there shouldn't be copyright laws anymore. That's when we'll know that we can suspect now there's AI around that's smarter than us, but that's when we'll know that it's around and smarter than us.
Yeah, well, it'll certainly get smarter than us. The question is, can it go? I mean, logic is objective, right? It's logic is logic. So can it?
Yeah, whoever programs it. Yeah.
Right. If rules are, certainly AI is not objective now. I mean, you can go on to like a chat GPT and ask certain things that have like political ramifications, and it'll give you one side of the political aisle. It's horrifying to see in some ways, because if people, but the human driven media isn't any better. So, I don't know that it'll be worse. Now, the positive side is, I mean, we have like nanobots and, these microscopic robots and that can go to be injected into the bloodstream and go and search for disease and then find things like you could find blockages in your arteries and they could fix them. And, so there's all that. So it can prolong life in a lot of ways. One of these guys I met at the conference was talking about sending robots to Mars because there's so much has to be done to like create and sustain life, right? If we want to be multiplanetary. But you can just send these AI beings to Mars and they can create it. And then when it's ready and sustainable and livable for humans, they can send for us, and I see that happening probably pretty soon. I think Elon Musk the other day said we'll send a manned mission to Mars within 4 years. It's remarkable.
There's a good idea for a story. You have Mars is colonized by AI, and then it sends for humans, but it's not friendly. They're sending for them because they've made a deal with some other race of AI out in the universe, and they're going to trade humans for whatever they want from that other place.
Sure. Or they're looking for a new food source, or they're looking for a slave labor. Or
yeah.
Yeah, the dark side of this is pretty easy to come up with. You can think a lot of that, but there is a lot of really positive things that will happen. The issue is it'll happen so fast. And I mean, government is always lagging like, 10, 15 years behind the technology. People themselves don't understand it. I talk to writers around the country and I hear things like, they're thinking of it as like a spell check. And I'm like, you don't understand. Will it be able to drive my car? You won't even be in your car. Like it'll just do everything for you, or if you had to go someplace, it'll tell you where you have to go and take you there. It's like everybody will have an AI assistant with them. And I see this within the next couple of years, like maybe next year, it's going to happen fast. And that AI assistant will take care of everything for you. I mean, you won't be, looking things up on Google anymore. All the world's knowledge will be either implanted in you or in a robot companion for you. Every kid will have their own tutor. So I mean, the possibilities for abuse are crazy, right? To be able to manipulate a population and control information and, but there's a huge upside too, but regardless, it's coming, so we just have to be, I think we have to have a lot of discussion about it, and people have to just embrace it at this point and figure out the best way to use it for humanity.
Yeah. It'll get in and like change what an inch is. And everybody will be like, well, I don't have a ruler anymore because the AI just told me that the inch is this far, but it's actually this far. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting too, and like how when things are done for you, right? When there's automation, like now, people are losing a lot of skills. Like kids in school now don't know how to research things, right? It's not the same way. They don't know how to go to original sources. They plug it in a search bar, and that's how they get to things. And it's a very limited way to research something there. But people have lost a lot of their critical thinking ability as well. And people don't do math in their head. I mean, not everybody, obviously, but a lot of people, people don't know how to get anywhere by reading. People forgot how to read a map. They're just being told with directions how to get places. You become so reliant, I guess, on the technology that you become useless without it in some ways. And, that's one thing over like a few decades or a few generations, but what happens over thousands of years? Like what happens over a long enough time span where it can actually affect like evolution and adaptation? What happens to people then when machines are doing things for them?
Yeah, I wonder if you have the AI that wants to be organic and the people that want to live forever. So they're trying to download their consciousness into a computer, and the computer is trying to make a human body. There's just going to be, or an organic body, whatever it looks like. Yeah, it's going to be, yeah, we're just going to be harvested for our brain matter.
Well, I mean, this is happening in our lifetimes, right? Like to some extent, like we're growing organs, right? We're able to recreate much of the human body at this point. We're able to download some parts of the human mind, like we're not there yet, obviously, but it'll happen fast. And that's what people don't get about AI or quantum computing. If you're doing everything at a 1, now you're doing it at like 50 million, it's like at that speed. And so all the problems that we're trying to solve now would be instantaneously solved, based on the right computing and the right AI. And that's when everything will change, for good or for bad, probably both.
Yeah. Yeah. When you write, what kind of place are you writing in? Do you have a specific time of day you set aside to write? Are you looking for a word count or time or topic? And do you write in the same place all the time? What's going on with that?
I can write anywhere. And I think that's important for writers. You can be really precious, and you can, need to have everything in the right place. And there's certainly places where people are more comfortable, and I get that. But I started as a journalist before I went into law enforcement. It was about, you have a job to do. You have to write a certain thing by a certain time. You get it done. So I think that's an important trait for writers to have. I personally like to write in the morning. I get up. There's this kind of weird, I don't know, like we don't know what happens when you sleep. You know what I mean? Like you say, your subconscious works. You solve problems. You get into that REM sleep. Your brain is working all night. So if you think of a problem before you go to bed, a lot of times you wake up with the answer. And there's like a quasi like half asleep, half awake state you get into when you first wake up. And there's a very creative state. And people have talked about this for hundreds of years. So when I first get up, I try not to do anything else but that. I'm thinking about the book, and I write, and I do write to a word count. So I've been writing full time since 2017. My wife and I own a restaurant, and I'm a GM there and the day manager to help her out. And we've also turned it into a literary salon. So I've interviewed close to 100 authors at this point since we've been there. And so, that takes up a lot of my time. So recently I just turned in a book, my book 2 in the series, for a new publisher. And I wrote it like 300 words at a time. I was just, whenever I had the minute, a few minutes, 15 minutes, I wrote something. And it was a brutal way to write like a 90,000 word thriller. And so for this new one I'm doing, I used to do 2,000 words a day. And this new one, I'm like, all right, let me try to do 1,000 with my schedule. I think I can do that. And even that was better, but it wasn't quite there. So I went back to my 2,000 word, minimum a day just recently, maybe 2.5 weeks ago or something. And it's complete. I feel like I'm writing again, though. The story's flowing, things are working,
Nice.
So for me, getting through that first draft usually would take 6-7 weeks. Now it tends to take a couple of months or more, just because of my schedule. But I try to get through that first draft as fast as possible. And then lots of iterations of editing, when I go through. And, because you fix it in the editing, right? I do like passes on language and character arcs and, structural arcs. And, I do a lot of editing, or I hope to, if I have enough time. So
do you have a couple people that you send drafts to whenever they get to the point where you're not done with it, but you would like some feedback on whether it's tracking or not?
No, I don't. I do so much work in the editing process that I don't want anyone to see it until it's done, and I also want the freedom to be able to write whatever I want to write and then fix it, so I don't, and also I respect people's time too. I know people would do it, but I don't want anyone looking at it till I feel like it's done, so like I'll spend, a couple months, say, finishing that first draft. And then I'll go through and I'll do a structural edit, looking at, is it 3, I write in like a 4-act structure. It's like act 2, sort of a 2A, 2B with a turning point in the middle. So I'm making sure like the plot's tracking. I'm doing like an international espionage series right now. So it's an international thriller. There's lots of, subplots and lots of moving parts. It's very complicated. Making sure I'm answering all the questions and everything's working, making sure the pacing is good and everything. And then I'll go through and I'll look at the characters, make sure the character arcs for the major, like, point of view characters are working. And then I'll go through and I'll do like a language edit where I'm, when you're reading dialogue, you shouldn't need like a dialogue tag. You should know who's speaking by the way they're speaking, So I'll
Yeah.
go through and I'll fix a lot of that. That like the thing I'm writing a first draft right now, and I need lots of work on the actual dialogue when I go through for the editing. So, I'll do all these passes, and I'll do like a line edit where I start at the beginning and I literally just go through the whole thing. And then I'll print it out and I'll see it on, in black and white on paper, because your brain processes that differently. And I'll catch all kinds of errors. I'll read the dialogue out loud. If I have time, I do all these editing, all these editing passes. And then I use some software. It's called Pro Writing Aid. And it's software. It gives you like 15 reports. It's those things like echoes, where you have words that are the same, that are too close, close in proximity.
Wow.
It'll tell you overused words. One of the things I found most useful is it'll tell you like repeated phrases. And you wouldn't think you would do this, but I just looked at one from my last book that I turned in like about a month ago, and it had an 8-word repeated phrase, and it had like some 5-word phrases that were repeated like 3 or 4 times. And that's terrible.
Wow.
I couldn't catch it, right? Because I wrote it, but also a reader wouldn't catch it, but subconsciously they would know they'd heard it, and it would make the writing boring. So little things like that, they have stylistic checks, and I sound like I have stock in the company, but I'm a big, that is software I find very helpful. I don't do I probably do half of what it suggests, but at least it points things out for me so I can look at it and fix it. So I do all that. When that's done, and I'm like, okay, this baby's ready to go. And I edit until I can't open the file one more time. Like when I've read it so many times, I just literally can't do another pass. And I'm like, okay, now it's ready. And then I'll send it to, like, sometimes I'll do first chapters to my critique group. And I have some really talented writers in there. I have a subgroup. I have a few people that sometimes I'll send some stuff out to specifically. And then I used to do a dozen beta readers for every book, but honestly, my publishing schedule is so tight right now. I just don't have time. So the last 2 books I sent out, nobody saw it. Like literally nobody saw it. And I don't recommend that. I think it's good to have beta readers. So for this one, I'm trying to get it done in time where I'll be able to, because you have to give people a month or 2 to read, So I'm trying to get it done in time where I can get it to some beta readers. And then of course it goes to my publisher, and there's an acquiring editor. Then they send it, if necessary, to a structural editor, then to a copy editor. So, it'll get a lot of eyeballs on it by the end.
Was the first book you did you have a publisher like that, or did you self-publish anything?
No, so I have self-published a novella. There was a Kindle Vella, is like a serial form short story thing on Amazon. And those kind of serial stories are like a multi-billion-dollar business worldwide. And there's a few of them in the US, a lot of them in Asia. They're all over the world. And so when Amazon was announcing this, I'm like, hey, let me try this. Like, I'm a first adopter. So I was like, hey, let me get in. This could be fun. So I did a Vella series about a female Army medic who gets left behind in Afghanistan during the withdrawal. She's presumed dead, and she gets abandoned there because they can't find the body. And then, like, when I was in the middle of writing this thing, we actually had that rushed withdrawal from Afghanistan. And while that was going on, I had people like, I used to work in Afghanistan, and I have all kinds of like foreign nationals that we worked with begging me to save their children and their lives. And every day, I think I had 67 people I was trying to get out, and I got 7 or 8 of them, maybe 9. Like, most of them we didn't get out. So it was just like emotionally, it was a tough time. And I was writing this book about things that were now coming true, right? And so I just said, okay, that's it. So I kind of wrapped it up a little prematurely. And then I had readers tell me they would rather just get it in an ebook form because they didn't like this Vella series, and you have tokens and all this kind of thing. So I self-published that as an ebook. And kind of slapped it together and put it out there. Again, not the way you're supposed to do that, but I like the story. And I last National Novel Writing Month in November, I wrote a sequel to it. So I have like a 90,000 word sequel to this novella. And I'll probably turn it. My goal is to turn it into like a trilogy, I think. So I'll probably find a publisher at that point, or maybe self-publish it and put that back out there. But no, my first book was with a traditional publisher. They're really good in a lot of areas. I was not real happy with their editing. I'm with a new publisher now as well. I have 3 books with the old publisher, and I have a 4-book series I'm working on with a Seven River Publishing now, and they're fantastic too. They have great coming. Both my publishers have great covers. They're good people. I've been lucky. I've had a really good experience with publishing so far.
How does your blogging fit into it, or do you still do that?
Yeah, I don't do that much. I mean, you know, I'm busy. We run this literary salon, so I'm doing, at least one like interview of an author every week, and then I'm on a book every 6 months with my new publisher, and then I've got the books that are out there that I'm still working with, and I actually love writing psychological suspense, and that was more what my first book was, and I've got a couple of manuscripts, and I was just working with my agent. I'm going to get a new agent now, but I've been through three agents, and for anyone who's done that, it's a brutal process, like querying and submitting and trying to find the right, getting the right person. And but I yeah, we were talking about rebranding because I have, like a crime thriller. I have this AI mystery thriller we were talking about. I have a 4-book espionage series, but then I have my first book was more psychological suspense, certainly suspense with like horror elements. And I have a bunch of these finished manuscripts that are like that. They're like female protagonist, suspense books, and I love writing them. And I think they're some of the best things I've written too. But it's a totally different audience than, people who are picking up like my espionage book. When I've done like Facebook ads in the past, and I could see my first book, the psychological suspense, was like I think 80% women, and then the next book was a crime thriller based on a real terror conspiracy because I used to hunt terrorists, right, in the real world, and that one was 90% male. So like literally there was almost no crossover between the two, and it's really hard to build and grow an audience if you're bouncing around in subgenres. So my plan is to come out and do psychological suspense, but under like J.J. Higgins, or under a pseudonym, an open pseudonym, just to signal the reader, this is this kind of book, this is this kind of book.
Do you have a continuing theme that goes through all of your writing, whether you thought about it or not?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll think about themes for individual books, right? Like I'm writing a book now, and the theme is Chinese disintegration warfare, right? Like, so that's kind of the broad topic, like the plot. But actually, like thematically, I didn't realize what I was doing as much until I was already writing, and then realized like it's a lot of individualism. It's a lot of themes of using your mind to escape danger. It's understanding that you have to have a will to live, and you have to show courage, and you have to find the will to survive within yourself, basically. And there's other themes about like morality themes and that kind of thing. But I'm not thinking about those in advance. You're right, those sort of come through my writings. That's how I think. Also, the anti-bureaucracy thing. A lot of my characters are getting things done despite the system, and which was sort of my actual career in real life too.
Yeah, I found that in law enforcement that it was more frustrating dealing with administration than it was dealing with criminals.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, absolutely. The biggest things I did in my career, I did it in spite of my agency in a lot of ways, and it doesn't mean like the agency or the mission or the whole. It's just the bureaucracy that comes up, and it's individual bureaucrats within that bureaucracy. People are in federal government. People like managers are often worried about their career, and any decision you make, they're looking at it through a lens with how that will affect them. And the bigger the agency, the more risk averse people within it get. And I had people, some of my best cases. My supervisor told me to drop the case, but I just wasn't going to do it. It was too important. So that overcoming bureaucracy is a big thing in my like espionage and my crime thrillers. Anything with like special agents and cops, they're all going a little rogue, within limits.
Yeah, nice. When you talked about it before, of that time right when you get up to try to hit the creative thoughts right there. But do you have any other ways that you get into that zone for writing when you need to?
Yeah, so the morning that I mentioned, right, that's a good thing. And also, like, I just wrote this book, this a few hundred words at a time, 15 minutes here or there. It's such a terrible way because I like to get into flow. Like if I'm sometimes, and we've all felt this as writers, you're struggling, the words just aren't coming. You know what you want to say, and it's getting there, but it's clunky, and you're getting distracted. But when you hit that flow, when you're just channeling it, and lately I do about 500 to 700 words an hour. I mean, that's about what I do. Sometimes though, when I'm in flow, it's much faster than that. So there are little tricks, like having a block of time really helps. So what I do is I go into our restaurant really early and I get it set up. And then before anyone shows up, before the vendors start coming and the staff starts arriving, I just write. And I get a lot of that done. And then a little later in the day, I have a write-in online with some writers, and that's always helpful when it's an external pressure to just keep writing because I have other people on a Zoom call and we're all, cameras are closed, but we're all there writing. So it helps a little. That sort of external pressure helps. And then I'll play music. Like I've got certain music that I've listened to so much that when I just hear it, it kind of triggers that creative muscle. That helps a lot. And mostly I'll tell people, leave me alone for this period of time, which anybody who works at home understands how difficult that can be. But you know what people don't get is they'll come, I just had to ask you one question, or, it's just, they'll pop in and I get this at work if I'm doing some writing while I'm at work, and they think, oh, well, that, I only took 30 seconds of your time, but for me to get into that flow state might have taken 30 minutes, and it can take, there's actual neuroscience on this. When you get interrupted, to get your focus back can take like 10 minutes. So like that 30-second conversation just sidelined me for 10 minutes. And when you're doing something creative too, right? It's especially a complicated like thriller plot or something, you're balancing character, the wants and the needs, the internal versus the external, subplots, other characters. You've got this whole like tower of cards in your head, and somebody comes in or knocks on the door and that whole thing can come crashing down, and you may never get those pieces back together. I don't want to sound too precious with this, but it does distract you, and it makes it difficult. So, I think there's a lot of, it's like with sleep, there's environmental things you can do, and diet, there's ways that you can make your sleep better. There's ways you can make your writing better that are shortcuts. I'll turn my phone upside down and turn it off because, so I can't see the screen. I don't have the pop-up notifications on my computer because that's all it takes, right? One email and you're like, oh no, even if you ignore it, now it's in the back of your head, like poking at you, like that you should respond to that person, So I'm like, that's the writing time. And I think it comes down to priorities, and I think I told you I've interviewed probably 100 writers, in the last year. And what I hear a lot from like new writers, like people, because I was in law enforcement, I get cops and spies and soldiers and reach out to me all the time on LinkedIn and a lot. And, so I'll counsel them because I've made all the mistakes. Right. And I continue to make new ones too. So I'm the point guy out there for mistakes. So I try to counsel these people, and, it's when you're doing this, there's so many pitfalls, and you just want to be able to, understand that it takes like a dedication. And so these new writers and people that are reaching out to me, the one thing I hear all the time from them is, oh, when I have the time, or if I had the time, or I plan to. And it's like, whenever I hear that, I know it's never going to happen. I know it won't. And I hear this like, oh, I'm going to get a cabin in the woods and go, like, it's like, no, you're not. And if you do, the pressure you would have to write your book in like 3 weeks in a cabin in the woods is insane. So I tell people, just write every day. If you want to write, start today. There's 24 hours in a day. I don't care if you have kids and 2 jobs and the whole thing. I work 120 hours a week. If I can find time to write a novel every 6 months, you can certainly do it. If you write 250 words a day, that's basically a book in a year. Find that 15 minutes. I dictate. That's another great tool, by the way. Dictation. I use Dragon software. It's like the original software for dictation.
Mm-hmm.
It's been around for 30 or 40 years. And I have an app on my iPhone. And, I'll be, when I'm walking to work, or if I have to go do an appointment, or I'm going to pick something up, I'll open my app and I'll know the scene that's next, and I'll dictate, even if it's just a dialogue. I'll dictate that scene, and you'd be shocked. 10 minutes, and I just got, I dictated 300-400 words. That's a book a year right there in those in between times. Sorry, that's a long answer, but there's a lot of stuff you can do.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to hear because it's a lot of things I do. So you're like, oh, okay, good. That's good. That's good. The listening to music, have a soundtrack for every book, that if I hear those songs, I've listened to them so much, I could tell you the chapter and the order that those songs are to me. Unofficial soundtrack. It's not out there released or anything, but oftentimes when I'm putting a book together, if I don't have a chapter title yet or a scene title or whatever, then I organize it by those songs and just this is this one, this is that one. And then when you're running or cutting the grass or doing something that you can divide your attention with, it just seems like that's when the creative spirit is there even more. And then the more you show up for it, the more it expects you to be there. I feel that a lot more with poetry than I do with writing. Like I was always worried after doing the first poetry book. I thought, okay, it's out of my system now. I'll go back to doing sci-fi. And then I had set that time and those goals aside every day to, try to write 10 poems a month. And then sometimes you do 15, sometimes you do 9. But I think that the creativity that's out there in the ether, wherever it's from, whatever it is, that it recognizes you're trying to communicate with it. And it's like, oh, okay, well, think about this. What about this? And that's the difference between a writer and not writer is you recognize it. So you get the idea and you're like, oh, I need to write that down. That's a good line. Put it in your phone, write it on a piece of paper, whatever. And then that's the first step. First step, you recognize it. Then you wrote it down. Now you have to organize it. And then after that, you got to do something with it into some sort of structure of whatever type of writing it is. Do you do a lot of notes like that throughout the day or any time where the idea occurs and you write down?
Yeah, I mean, you said so much good stuff in there. I want to unpack it a little bit because I agree with everything you just said, but there's some real gems, right? And part of it is you talk about like, being mowing the lawn or doing these kind of mindless things. And these are like the down times when your mind wanders, right? And that's when real creativity can happen. And your subconscious things are just kind of churning and your mind's doing different things. And we've lost a lot of that in society because we have our phones in our hand all the time because there's always some kind of input. The boring times when you didn't have anything else, so you had to use your mind, or have gone away. So it's really important to have those. And it's sort of like it taps into that sleep mind that you have when your subconscious is working on things. And that's why I don't know if you've experienced this, but most people I know have, like, you're in the shower, right? And so it's this total relaxation. Your mind's just wandering. You can't do anything. You're in the shower with water pouring on you, and people have these ideas. My problem is when I get these fleeting ideas, I would have so many of them in like the shower. I'd have to think of acronyms to remember them. Then I go with a towel running through the house, trying to get to my office so I could write them down. And I would invariably like lose 2 or 3 of them. So what I got was this thing called Aqua Notes. Sounds so stupid, but I think writers get it. And it's waterproof paper with a pencil and it sticks to the wall in your shower. And I would just write this stuff down, and I think you're also right about this, like, like the ideas that are out there and this, connecting to your muse or however you want to think about it. The more you do it, there is a neurological answer to that. Like you actually are like rechanneling your mind. Like your brain physically will change the shape, right? It'll create new neural pathways based on your work. So if you're learning a language, if you're doing a certain thing, your brain will reconfigure itself to grow in that area. So you can grow parts of your brain. And it's like that with creativity. And there was a really interesting study years ago I saw. It was about seeing opportunity. And it was about people who just in their daily lives or they're hearing things like, oh, what a great idea for a business, or what a great idea to do this, or I could solve that problem. And the more you do that, the more your brain actually sees it. Suddenly you're seeing opportunity everywhere. And this is where a lot of like entrepreneurs and a lot of innovators live. And I think it's a very similar thing for creatives when you're doing writing or whatever it is, poetry, music, whatever it is you're doing, where the more you're thinking about it, the more it comes to you. Like the more I get into flow, the more story ideas come to me. When I moved from 1,000 words a day back to 2,000, like I'd always been doing, all of a sudden, every day I'm coming up with a new story idea, like every day. And I'm writing, I'll do like a page synopsis of it because honestly, it'll be gone. It'll be gone the next day. It's like if you wake up in the middle of the night with a story idea, write it down because you will not remember it in the morning. It's very rare that I'll remember it in the morning. I won't remember things if I'm walking to the office. By the time I get there, I'll have forgotten that I meant to do this thing. So I have like a task list on my phone. I'll write it on. I can leave myself a voicemail. I try to organize it so it's all in the same place. But writing notes and constantly keeping that novel in your head is a way to be super efficient and productive. If you're thinking about it and you think about it before you go to sleep and you wake up, oh, I have some ideas, you write them down. When you go to sit at that computer, you're dying to go. You have all this stuff you want to put on the page, and you can knock out a couple thousand words very quickly. And I say a couple thousand words, everybody's different. I've talked to so many writers, and I speak at conferences, and everywhere I go, I'm talking to readers and writers, and everybody's different. But there are some universals, and you hit on them, right? It's like, write down the ideas. If you want to write. Just write. Start today. Like if you think you're a writer or want to be a writer, start right now. Start today. Make yourself every day before you go to sleep. Write one page. Write one paragraph. It doesn't really matter. It's about habit forming, and the more you do it, like for me, getting up in the morning and sitting behind the computer, and I do it at a restaurant because nobody's there, but you can do it anywhere you want. I used to do it in my office before we moved. Wherever you go to a coffee shop, go for a walk. It doesn't matter. But that signals my mind, now it's work time. And then I have word counts because I believe in, producing a certain amount. Like there's a difference with that first book where you could have years to write it, and then you sell it and you have a multi-book deal. And now you have a book due every 6 months or once a year, whatever it is. And it's moved to 6 months, by the way. Like it used to be 1 year for people. It's most publishers are looking for 2 a year now. So it's a pretty fast schedule. So there's a lot more pressure. So you really just have to produce.
Yeah, that's a lot of good things there. A lot of good things. I think the music one, when I associate it with the scene or the story, that is a way to get me into that thought pretty quick. And then visualizing where those ideas come from is also a thing I do, just daydreaming about it. And then as far as when you're writing down those notes, if you think about it, if you're half asleep, then wake up enough to write it down because you're not going to remember it. And it only takes a few times of not remembering it that then you're like, look, am I serious about this? I got to write these things down. So even when you're asleep, half asleep, and you're like, oh, that's a good idea. What a great line. That's going to be good. You gotta get up and get as much down as you can because it's like a dream. You're going to forget it pretty quick. But I do visualize where those ideas come from. And for me, poetry is different than writing books. And I visualize a dark forest, not so dark you can't see, but like a twilight type forest. And you're just walking through this forest and the ideas are in there. And you have to show up to be able to take that walk through that forest. And I'm not sure what it is. I mean, as time goes by, I think about it more and more as far as like trying to create this concept of what it is so I can get into the moment quicker. But now I visualize it as this place between worlds or existence where you can walk halfway into a forest, but you can't do any more than that because then you're walking out the other side. So maybe this forest, this area is a barrier between our real here of what we think is real and somewhere else. And we're trading ideas with some other thing that's also being inspired by us and we're being inspired by them or not. Maybe it's just one way. I don't know. But I do feel like it's a different, like I don't have a map for it in my mind. It's not like a path that I can say I go this way and I think about this type of poetry, that way, the other. But I do feel like there are different sources and I can tell the difference if I'm really serious about applying myself to understanding it. Like I can say, well, I can tell when I'm writing a poem that I'm writing because it's not as good. And then when it's the poem that you're channeling and you're like, wow, what does that mean? Oh, I know what that means now because of this, this, and this. And then you could take 3 or 4 different poems and look at them and go, well, this is all from the same source. And these other 3 poems, they're from a different source. It's still maybe in that realm of world between worlds, but I don't know. What do you think about things like that? And if so, how?
Sort of. I do, but in a different way. So I love your visualization technique and trying to put yourself into that space where you're open to these stories. I believe you have to be open to these stories too. I do believe they come from a different place. It's interesting because I interview so many authors. The one question I always let it grow organically, but the one question I always ask them is, where does story come from? Which sounds really kind of, juvenile, but it's a very deep question, and I think you've answered it. And I tend to agree more with you than with some of the answers I hear, but I think a lot of people haven't really thought about it. But I do get a tremendous number of authors who believe in this channeling thing, that they don't know where it's coming, but they feel like they are just a scribe and the story's coming to them and they're just writing it down. I think any writer who has had the experience where a character surprises them or does things that they like, why would you do that? Like, the character's coming to life. And, there's a lot of explanations for that. But I mean, that is the feeling that you're not in control of the story, whether it's your subconscious doing it or whatever. Right. So the visualization and walking to a field, I think for me, it's opening myself up and just like being open to it and understanding, like, I'm grateful. Like I always feel this feeling of gratitude that I'm able to channel a story and that I have this opportunity, to give a story. That's a big deal for me. We're lucky to be able to write, stories, how humans learn. Stories is how people pass on history. It's an important thing. So I do that. I'm also envious of the putting together the music playlist, because I listen to the type of music for the type of story I'm writing. So if it's scary or whatever, I use Spotify. I'm too lazy to like go and make a playlist, and I probably don't have a deep enough backlog or background to understand what to put in there. So I'll go into like Spotify and I'll put like horror music or like certain things that like the John Williams stuff from like E.T. and Jaws, and like these kind of things that evoke like memories from my childhood. And like I'll do a lot of that, a lot of instrumental, it's almost exclusively instrumental. There's I'm blanking on some of the names of the composers, Johansson, and some of these people they have some really like scary and intense music, like the Game of Thrones soundtracks. Like depending on what I'm doing or time period pieces, I'll put that stuff on. But I listen to Vivaldi's Four Seasons for some reason. That's one of the ones I love the most. I listen to that all the time, and when just hearing that, I immediately have to start writing. That is my writing music. But I listen to something different every day. But I have probably 30 or 40 different like playlists that I get from Spotify because I'm too lazy to create them myself.
Yeah, I'm still going with iTunes, where I buy the individual songs and then make my playlist in iTunes. I think my wife has like Amazon Music or something, but I haven't gotten to that point yet. I still feel like, because you had the albums and then you had the tapes, 8 tracks before that, and then you had the CDs, you have all this collection, and now it's on the computer. And then you're like, well, what if they decide to cut me off? Then I don't have any music anymore. What's up with that? And then, I mean, I guess it's all an illusion because it could all go away pretty quick. But yeah, having the different playlists for it, and I probably have 30 or 40 playlists on my phone right now that are different things I've written or I'm writing. And if you want to think about that story, then you put that playlist on and go run or go swim, take a shower, whatever. Then something's going to happen if you put your time into thinking about it. It is. I do feel very lucky. It is a lot of gratitude with it. And it does make me think, what is that creative spirit doing when I'm not engaging with it? So then I feel guilty when I don't, if I don't set that time aside or take it serious enough to write down those ideas, because that's a good idea. I need to do something with that, or else somebody else is going to do something with it, or maybe nobody else will do something with it. I don't know. That creative spirit has to be out there talking to everybody, and not everybody's listening. So I think that's why when you read a story and it resonates so much with you, it's because you're tuned in to that source of the creativity of it. And then, I mean, you start explaining it too much, it sounds like a cult, but I wonder if humanity is everything, like if we are all one, like if you could hold that in your mind, you would definitely treat people differently. If you thought, well, that's me, so I'm not going to be mean to me. That's hard to do when that part of you is being mean to you. So I don't know. In law enforcement, I think one of my things I was struggling to do all the time was empathy. of being able to see something from someone else's point of view. And I think if you do that too much, you don't get anything accomplished in law enforcement, because you're not going to enforce any laws, because you're going to find a reason to not do it. So you have to have enough to be able to appreciate it. But then I just wonder if we are all one in the end, and we're all in this reality experiencing things from a different perspective, if that's the point of this, is to experience from this perspective. And then that would explain good times, bad times, pain, horror, all that, because that's what you're here to experience.
Well,
for whatever reason.
No, that is good stuff. I mean, I think the universality of these like emotions and the deeper truths that are like human things that we talk about AI, that AI doesn't experience. And I think that's what you have to get to. There's a great agent, Donald Moss. He's written a bunch of books, and I took a master class with him, and he's written a lot of books on like putting emotion into your characters and things. But one of his workshops or exercises was, take your character at a moment when they're in the most danger, and what are they worried about? Then it's like, okay, what else are they worried about? Write the 3 things they're most worried about, and then be like, okay, write 3 more. Then be like, write 3 more. Like, and he makes you go deep and deep and deep, and then you realize it's not your guy, like in an espionage thing, who's worried about like this assassin killing him or something. He's worried about dying and orphaning his children. And that's something that everybody can understand, right? Like that, like that's a deep kind of universal human emotion, that you want to protect your children or protect your family. And so I think, that idea of empathy, you have to have it as a writer in your characters, for sure. Even your, like, everyone's a hero of their own story, right? So even your antagonist has a reason why they're doing what they're doing, and they think it's the right thing for them, and maybe they're a sociopath, so maybe 3 to 7% of the population or something, but maybe they're doing bad things, but they feel like the ends justify the means. That's a very common thing you see, right? You see it. You see it in presidential politics, right? Like, you see people just believe that. So I agree with you tapping into that. And the other thing you said, which I really agree with, is, you're been given this story, so you feel guilty if you're not doing something with it. It's like a gift, right? You have this high concept idea, or you have this character idea. That character, they become like real to you when you're writing them, and they're real for your readers when they're reading them. If you don't do something with that character, that fictional life of a character doesn't exist. It's gone, right? It's just gone if you don't do it. So I feel like as writers, we have an obligation. If you're able to write, and if you have these stories, and if you're a storyteller in any form, you have an obligation to do it. And I just, when writers get frustrated, because it's such a brutal business. I mean, people don't know how brutal it is, right? It's a brutal, brutal business filled with rejection, very little money, but it's still an obligation. It's a calling, And so when you have that, I think you have to do it. And that's why I have no patience for people who say they want to write something, but there's a big but, and there's some ridiculous reason why they can't spend 15 minutes a day writing, because that's literally all it takes.
I agree. It's well, with your talking to other writers, and you can really tell when the person is a writer, because they start saying things, you're like, oh yeah, I do that, and yeah, I like that. I've thought about that like that. So that's always fun. That's why I do a podcast, because I like the writing groups, not so much for hearing what other people have written or reading or putting out what I've written, but more of meeting the people that are the strange writers. Because if you go to a writing group, you're going to meet strange people. So you got to find your type of strange and then talk to them. That sounded weird. Anyway, so I think that's what keeps me coming back doing the podcast all the time, because I do find there are times where I go, what am I doing with this? But with your interviewing writers, what are you doing with that?
So I do all kinds. So we have this huge space, this beautiful place, Elaine's in Old Town Alexandria. So it's right in the historic district, right down by the water, and we seat 120 people. So we have all this space. And the restaurant thing is my wife's thing, right? It's this beautiful Mediterranean restaurant. We've won all kinds of awards, but that's not my thing, right? I was an agent, now I'm a writer, but we had this space. So I'm like, so we offer free space to authors. So it's just a way for us to kind of give back to the literary community. So if somebody wants to, do a book event or a launch or whatever it is they want to do, we don't charge them for it. And what I usually do is like a 45-minute one-on-one interview with them, which are really fun. The interviews are great. And I record a lot of them. Maybe someday I'll have them on a podcast, or I might just do articles from them, take the best parts of the interviews. But I've also done like panels. I've done horror panels and crime panels and espionage panels. And we partner with like Barnes & Noble will come in and sell the book sometimes. We partner with the Alexandria Library, Mystery Writers of America, Sisters in Crime, like all these different groups. We host book clubs. And it's basically, I've had people coming like with children's authors doing readings. We've done poetry readings. Like I will never say no to an author. If it's a literary event, we'll support it. But for me, the most fun is like, kind of like you, is talking to these people. And, based on genre too, you find some interesting personality types, right? Like interviewing horror authors can be very different than like, memoir or children's book or historians or politics or, we do everything, but it's definitely like mystery, thriller, suspense heavy, because that's what I write in. So that's where a lot of the people I know, and I go to conferences that focus on those things.
Okay. What's the best way for people to follow what you do?
Probably my website, my horribly out of date website that I mentioned. It's jeffreyjameshiggins.com.
You got to get AI on that thing.
I know. Yeah, it's very soon. I will. Yeah, but I mean, like my latest book that came, I launched that book, The Forever Game, we were talking about that launched on Leap Day, and then I have the next book is called The Havana Syndrome. It's with Seven River Publishing, and that comes out on, I believe, June 21st. It's like the first day of Thriller Fest. I remember that. And so that comes out next year, and that's a 4-book series right now. So there'll be a book every 6 months on that. I'm currently writing book 3.
And you have the newsletter that people can subscribe to.
Yeah. And I said through my website, and I was doing a really good job. I started it like once a month, and then it was once a quarter, and then it was every 6 months. And that was sort of like, I put it out when I can. It's not the best way to do a newsletter, but what I try to do is put things in that newsletter more than just like, here's my next book coming out. I like to put in things about writing and craft. And like, I really, as you can tell, like, just like you, I enjoy talking about the craft and the business of writing. And I mean, we didn't even touch on the business, right? But that's a whole other animal, So yeah. I spend a lot of time every week, like counseling other writers when they reach out to me, just trying to save them months and months and months of frustration, because I made every single mistake since I started writing. I started full time in 2017, and I've done everything wrong, but I've learned and then done it the right way. But I still keep finding new mistakes to make.
Yeah, they're always there. Well, your website will be in the show notes, so if people want to check that out, they can. And do you have any things you wanted to talk about that we didn't, or any thoughts in closing?
If people want to reach out to me, if you have writers and they want to do something around that, I mean, I have people fly in from California, Chicago, Texas, New York, like, they come in for events, because I have a lot of New York Times bestsellers who come in, so we've done some pretty good stuff. Happy to do an event. But also for new writers, if you want to reach out to me via email, jeffrey@jeffreyjameshiggins.com. I'm happy. Every week I talk to writers, and like, there's a lot to the query process. There's a lot to finding an agent. There's a lot of routes to publication at this point, and each one of them is a minefield, and it's in the whole publishing industry has changed significantly in the last 10 years. So, I'm happy to talk about the advice that I've been given to the agents I talk to and the editors I talk to, and, the things I've done wrong that cause problems for me. And, so if anybody's looking for that, shoot me an email. I'm happy to, I love getting on the phone with someone for 15 minutes and saving them from making a huge mistake. That's sort of I feel like that's putting out some goodness in the world, and it always comes back to you. When I hear somebody I spoke to has just landed a big contract, I get really happy.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for your time. Maybe perhaps in the future we'll talk and we can get into the business of writing, the business side of it a little bit more, but I don't want to overwhelm anybody. They should be writing right now.
Exactly. Right. If there's one piece of advice, just stop the excuses and sit down and write. It doesn't have to be good. No one's going to see it but you. You got plenty of time to fix it, and you got to get to that 1,000,000 words, right, to achieve some kind of mastery. So just start getting the words on paper.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you very much again. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.
All right. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.